The cafe opened its doors at 6:30 a.m., a soft bell over reclaimed wood floors announcing the arrival of the first patrons. Early sunlight filtered through floor-to-ceiling windows, painting golden stripes across the mismatched tables and illuminating the chalkboard menu scrawled with today's single origin pour-over. The hiss of the espresso machine mixed with the low murmur of morning greetings as regulars claimed their favorite seats. In the far corner, under a wall of trailing ivy and battered terracotta pots, sat Keisha Monroe. Her notebook lay open beside a half-empty latte, its pages filled with crossed-out lines and half-formed verses. She wore a faded leather jacket over a bright scarf, colors that spoke of her poetry's vibrancy amid the cafe's cozy neutrality. Her pen hovered over the page, poised between thought and expression. Behind the counter, Elliot the barista moved with practiced efficiency, steam wand in hand, frothing milk to velvety perfection. He glanced toward Keisha, noting the tip jar, its glass body already rich with crumpled bills. He assumed the tips belonged to the morning rush, a token of routine rather than personal gratitude. His expression remained polite but distant as he set the latte down and swept a clean rag across the wood. Keisha watched him through the corner of her eye, sensing a trace of cool reserve, but choosing to focus on her scribbled lines. Dawn's breath warms my cup, while shadows of yesterday linger at the door. She paused, finger tracing the syllables, fine-tuning her imagery of light and lingering doubt. Outside, the city stirred, commuters hurrying along the sidewalk, their faces half lit by the rising sun. Inside, the cafe's rhythm pulsed. The tap of fingertips on laptops, the soft squeak of chairs, and the gentle clink of porcelain. Elliot approached slowly with a freshly brewed cappuccino. "Here you go," he said, setting the cup before her. His tone was courteous, but his eyes flicked past her, already scanning for the next order. Keisha offered him a small nod of thanks, her gaze unwavering. As the line at the counter began to grow, Elliot's focus shifted entirely to the queue. He refilled sugar dispensers, wiped down the counter, and made small talk with regulars. Keisha's presence remained part of the morning tableau, visible yet unseen, her quiet determination undercut by the cafe's unspoken barriers. When Keisha finished her latte, she gently left a generous tip on the table, a silent thank you to the space that nurtured her inspiration. Gathering her notebook, she rose and stepped toward the door, unaware that her gesture would soon become the catalyst for change in this familiar corner of the city. Keisha slipped out the cafe's back door, her notebook clutched to her chest and the morning chill brushing her cheeks. She hurried down the sidewalk toward her next appointment, an editorial meeting at a local magazine, confident she'd left a token of appreciation for her morning refuge. Inside, Elliot cleared the tables in rhythm with the growing rush. He reached Keisha's corner and paused at her empty cup, noting the folded bills beside the saucer. Assuming a patron had changed their mind or left the cash behind by mistake, he swept the bills into his hand and tossed them into the tip jar without a second thought. Moments later, regulars approached. One called out to Elliot, praising the latte's perfect microfoam. Another asked for their usual almond croissant. Elliot nodded as he refilled mugs and rang up orders. The forgotten tip jar lay inconspicuous by the register, its contents commingled in a sea of small bills. The door swung open again, admitting more customers. Elliot's attention shifted entirely to calls of double tall cappuccino and black coffee to go. No one remarked on the missing tip. After all, it was only cafe etiquette, not law. But in Keisha's absence, the cash vanished into anonymity, her deliberate act of gratitude erased before it had the chance to be acknowledged. That afternoon, Keisha found herself restless at her magazine desk. The hum of fluorescent lights and the quiet tap-tap of keyboards surrounded her, but her thoughts drifted back to the corner cafe and the unclaimed tip she had left. She stared at her blank screen, the cursor blinking accusingly as deadlines loomed. In her purse, her notebook lay waiting, its pages worn from late-night scribbles. She retrieved it, flipping past sketches of characters and rejected headlines until she reached a fresh sheet. Keisha pressed her pen to paper and let her mind wander back to that morning, the way the first golden rays of sunlight had pooled on her latte, the soft hiss of the steam wand, and the weight of the bills she had carefully folded by the saucer. Her pen moved in deliberate strokes, distilling the morning's quiet betrayal into 3 short lines. She counted the syllables beneath her breath, with each tap of ink against paper. First came the image of light, bright and yet unnoticed. Unseen morning light. Next, the memory of her generous gesture, the crisp relief she hoped it would bring. Generous hand offers gold. Finally, the ache of being overlooked, the persistence of unacknowledged kindness. Still, shadows linger. Keisha read the haiku aloud once, letting the words settle in her chest. It was small, only 17 syllables, but each one carried the weight of her morning's experience. She tucked the napkin into her notebook's pocket, the folded lines promising both confrontation and clarity. As she closed her notebook and returned to the glow of her laptop, Keisha felt a quiet resolve take root. The simple power of her haiku would give voice to what had gone unspoken in that cafe corner, and soon, every hush and every clink of a cup would bear witness to the truth she was ready to unveil. The next morning, the cafe buzzed with its usual rhythm, the hiss of steam ones, the soft clatter of spoons against saucers, and the low murmur of early commuters. Keisha slipped in just after the 8 a.m. rush, her notebook tucked under her arm, and the folded napkin, the haiku, hidden in her pocket. She chose a seat near the counter, heart pounding as she watched Elliot work, unaware of the storm about to unfold. Moments later, the cafe's apprentice called out, "Free refill to anyone who can solve our latte art challenge." Curiosity rippled through the crowd as Elliot set down a new round of drinks. Keisha rose, slipping quietly to the center of the floor with the napkin in hand. The chatter softened as she unfolded the paper, revealing her carefully inked verse. Unseen morning light. Generous hand offers gold. Still, shadows linger. She cleared her throat and, turning so every patron could see, recited the haiku in a clear, ringing voice. The words hung in the air, each syllable a gentle accusation and an invitation to reflection. Silence fell. The barista stopped mid-pour. The trainee stilled beside the grinder, and every patron held their breath. Elliot's eyes widened as he recognized the words. The tip jar glowed behind him, its contents now tainted by his assumption. He watched, mute, as the cafe owner hurried forward, cheeks flushed. "Miss Monroe," the owner said, voice tight with apology, "I'm so sorry. That was your tip." She knelt, retrieving the stack of bills from the jar and placing them back on Keisha's table. "Please accept this, and our deepest apologies." Murmurs of agreement rose from the patrons. How could he? And I saw it happen. And the atmosphere shifted from discomfort to solidarity. Elliot approached Keisha, his hands trembling. I'm sorry," he stammered. "I should have seen it." Keisha's gaze softened as she nodded, the power of her haiku having pierced the cafe's morning haze. In that charged moment, her words had illuminated the unseen light and forced every shadow to step aside. In the tense hush that followed Keisha's recitation, the cafe felt suspended in time. The apprentice barista froze mid-milk pour, the white froth poised in midair as patrons slowly set down their cups. Ellipses of disbelief rippled across every face. Regulars who had once waved cheerfully at Elliot now stared at him with newly sharpened scrutiny. The only sound was the faint drip of the espresso machine's group head, each droplet a metronome counting out seconds of collective reckoning. Elliot's hands trembled as he set the steaming pitcher on the counter. He looked at the napkin on the floor, its folds splayed open like a wounded confession, and back at the now empty table where Keisha had left her generous tip. Embarrassment washed over him, deep and hot. He had swept away her cash as though it were debris rather than gratitude. The weight of every assumption he'd carried, about who deserved kindness and who did not, fell on his shoulders in that moment, and he felt it buckle him to his knees. The cafe owner, Ms. Garcia, appeared beside him almost silently. Her usual warm smile was replaced by a solemn gravity. She reached out, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Elliot," she said quietly so only he could hear, "you know better than this. The tips here are tokens of thanks." Keisha's gesture was meant for the very hands that made her latte. Her voice carried both compassion and steel. With that, she turned and strode to Keisha's table. Patrons whispered and nudged one another as Ms. Garcia retrieved the exact bills, crisp 20s and 5s, from the communal tip jar. She returned them to Keisha's seat, placing them carefully beside the haiku napkin. "Ms. Monroe," she said, addressing Keisha with respectful formality, "on behalf of this cafe, I offer our deepest apologies. Your generosity was intended for us all, and it should never have been returned to shadows." Keisha lifted her gaze, her expression composed but laced with quiet triumph. She accepted the money with a nod. "Thank you," she replied, voice calm but carrying to every corner of the room. "May we all remember that light is given freely, and that we must be ready to receive it." As Ms. Garcia returned behind the counter, Elliot approached Keisha, wiping a hand on his apron as if to steady himself. His eyes were unexpectedly moist. "I'm so sorry," he began, voice thick. "I should have recognized your kindness. I didn't see you." Keisha offered him a small, forgiving smile. "You see me now," she said. "That's what matters." She reached into her notebook and tore out the napkin, handing it to Elliot. "Keep this," she told him. "Let it remind you. Generosity deserves acknowledgement." Behind them, the cafe's energy shifted. Regulars resumed their conversations, but now with a gentler tone, addressing both baristas and new customers by name. The apprentice barista, emboldened, placed a fresh napkin with a printed haiku by the register. Elliot returned to the counter, but this time he paused at each table, offering a personal thank you with every refill and every ring of the register. By the time the lunch crowd arrived, the cafe had transformed. The morning's oversight gave way to a renewed sense of community, one marked by vigilance against small injustices and an openness to every gift offered. Keisha returned to her corner table, sipped her latte, and watched the cafe bloom in response to a single verse, a haiku that had, in just a few lines, shattered assumptions and illuminated every face it touched. The cafe settled into a warm glow as late afternoon lights slanted through its windows, casting long beams across the worn wood floor. Elliot wiped down the counter with renewed purpose, his motions deliberate and unhurried. No longer did he move through the morning's routine as if on autopilot. Each step now carried the weight of genuine appreciation for every customer, every act of kindness. Keisha returned around 4 p.m., notebook in hand and curiosity alight in her eyes. She found Elliot at the register, meticulously cleaning the grinder's hopper. He looked up at the sound of her entrance, surprise and gratitude mingling on his face. He set aside the rag and stepped around the counter. "Ms. Monroe," he began, voice steady but edged with emotion, "I owe you more than an apology. Will you accept this invitation?" He held out a small, hand-lettered card, an invitation to the cafe's first official poetry night, to be held in a fortnight. The card bore the cafe's logo in delicate calligraphy, followed by these words: "You moved us with your haiku. Please grace us with more of your verse at Lit by Lattes, an evening of poetry, coffee, and community." Keisha's breath caught. Around them, the cafe's regulars, now friends, paused their conversations and turned to watch. The apprentice barista hovered by the napkin dispenser, face alight with anticipation. Even Ms. Garcia emerged from the kitchen doorway, arms folded in a proud smile. Elliot continued, "I've reserved this corner table for you every Tuesday evening. We'll dim the lights, set up a mic, and offer free tea to anyone who listens. It's our way of honoring the voice that reminded us to truly see each other." Keisha read the card, fingertips grazing the embossed lettering. She felt the cafe's transformation in that single moment. From a place where she had once gone unnoticed, to one eager to center her voice. She looked up at Elliot, sincerity in her gaze. "I'd be honored," she said softly. A ripple of applause rose around them. Regulars rose from their seats to congratulate her, pressing encouraging smiles and nods. An elderly man offered her his coffee coupon. A young woman handed over her phone number, eager to attend the reading. The apprentice set a fresh napkin at Keisha's corner table, this one pre-printed with a simple border, waiting to be filled with poetry. As the bustle of the now quieting cafe resumed, Keisha took her seat by the ivy wall. She placed the invitation card beside her notebook, alongside the original napkin with her haiku. Elliot returned to the counter, his every move now infused with respect, serving each customer as if they carried their own unwritten stories. That evening, after the last customer departed, Elliot and Ms. Garcia rearranged the cafe. Low-hung fairy lights wove through the ivy. A small stage of stacked crates supported a vintage microphone, and chairs formed a semicircle around the performance area. Overhead, the chalkboard now bore the words, "Every voice matters," in elegant script. Weeks later, on the appointed Tuesday, the cafe filled with anticipation. Poets of all ages trickled in, some nervous, some seasoned, eager to take their turn under Keisha's gentle glow. When her moment came, she stepped to the mic, clutching her notebook. The hush that followed mirrored the one she'd commanded weeks before. Then, in a voice strong and clear, she began, "Unseen morning light." And the cafe leaned in, once again illuminated by the power of her words and the promise of many more verses to come. The months that followed Keisha's first reading were nothing short of transformative for the little cafe and the community it served. Every Tuesday evening, under strands of amber fairy lights, the space filled with eager listeners and hopeful voices. The ivy-draped corner where Keisha first sat became Keisha's nook, a shrine to poetry and possibility. A small wooden plaque bore her opening haiku, hand-lettered by Ms. Garcia herself. "Unseen morning light. Generous hand offers gold. Still, shadows linger." Keisha watched from the stage as patrons, students, commuters, retirees, and fellow artists stepped up to the mic. Each performer drew strength from her example, sharing stories in free verse, sonnets, and slam poetry. Over chai lattes and oat milk cappuccinos, strangers bonded, voices once stifled now rising in confidence. Elliot, now head barista, greeted every reader by name, pouring complimentary cups and offering encouraging smiles that spoke of respect earned. One crisp autumn evening, Keisha welcomed Sofia Rivera, a high school senior whose poem about building bridges between divided neighborhoods moved the audience to tears. After her reading, Sofia approached Keisha at the counter. "You showed me I have a voice worth hearing," she said, eyes shining. Keisha clasped her hand. "And you showed all of us the power of sharing it," she replied. At that moment, the cafe felt like a living tapestry of stories, woven together by the courage to speak and the generosity to listen. Word of Lit by Lattes spread beyond the neighborhood. Local radio DJs began broadcasting excerpts, and a regional literary magazine published a feature titled "How One Haiku Changed a Cafe and a Community." Ms. Garcia built a small bookcase near the door, stocked with chapbooks by the evening's poets. Customers browsed the shelf as they waited for their drinks, discovering new writers and leaving behind donations to support the weekly event. On a snowy December night, the cafe hosted its first holiday special, Fireside Verses. Keisha arranged chairs around a makeshift hearth of stacked firewood, painted on canvas, and invited veterans from the local shelter to read poems memorializing their own journeys. Elliot served peppermint mochas on the house, and Ms. Garcia coordinated volunteers to deliver leftover pastries. The event raised funds to renovate the shelter's communal room, ensuring beds for families in need during the cold months. As winter thawed into spring, the cafe itself underwent a small renovation. Fresh paint in warm terracotta tones, new floorboards hand-sanded by regulars, and a glass display case showcasing the evolving history of Lit by Lattes. Photographs lined the walls, Keisha's healed notebook pages, reporters interviewing Sofia, and a candid shot of Ms. Garcia, Elliot, and Keisha sharing a triumphant hug under a banner that read, "Every voice matters." On the anniversary of that first haiku recitation, the cafe held an open mic marathon. Poets from distant boroughs, some once unknown, returned to honor the evening that had changed their paths. Keisha, now co-host and mentor, introduced the lineup from a small podium carved with her name. When her turn came, she read a new poem, a sonnet celebrating the ripple effect of generosity and the light we cast when we choose to see one another. A single verse can break the darkest pain and let the dawn's warm brilliance fill our eyes. In sharing words, we share our joys and pain, and weave our truths beneath forgiving skies. The applause that followed was thunderous, but Keisha's heart swelled at the sight of Elliot's proud grin and Ms. Garcia's teary nod. In that crowded room, every face reflected the cafe's journey, from a morning of shadows to an enduring legacy of illumination. And as the final speaker stepped up, Keisha understood that her single haiku had not just changed one barista's perspective, but had lit a beacon for all who longed to be seen and heard. Under the welcoming glow of warm lit windows and open hearts,